Welcome back. After a pair of mass shootings last month, one at a Buffalo, New York supermarket and another at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, political leaders in New York State are trying to prevent future violence with new gun laws. Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul signing a package of bills including the licensing of semi-automatic rifles, meaning anyone under the age of 21 will not be allowed to buy those guns. A ban on body armor and an expansion of the state's red flag provision was also signed into law. Joining us now with analysis is editor of Bearing Arms, Cam Edwards. Cam, welcome back to National Report. Your thoughts on the governor's plans here? Will these laws really make a difference to the gun violence we've seen?
No, they're not going to make a difference with the gun violence or the violent crime that's on the increase in New York State. If that were the case, New York SAFE Act that was passed back in 2013 would have made a difference. Unfortunately, I think the real impact of these laws are going to be felt by people who are law-abiding, responsible gun owners, young adults who are all of a sudden now forbidden from purchasing the most commonly sold rifle in the country today. And I have to tell you, too, I think that is one of the intended consequences of these laws. They want to reduce legal gun ownership. They want to make gun ownership taboo. But there are some unintended consequences as well that I'm concerned about, including in the expansion of New York's new red flag law.
Tell me about that.
Well, one of the things that this does is it now allows for counselors, mental health professionals, in addition to law enforcement, to file a red flag petition. And I've talked with a lot of gun owners and Second Amendment advocates at the state level around the country who say that they're already getting calls from people who are concerned that if they go to seek help, if they are, depressed, if there's something going on in their life and they want to talk to somebody, that they're afraid if they reach out, they're going to be subjected to a red flag law, that some overzealous counselor is going to be concerned about their mental state, and now they're going to try to take their guns away. So I have a sneaking suspicion that this is actually going to do the opposite of what we want, which is to destigmatize mental health treatment, to encourage people to get help when they need it. And I think this is actually going to push people away.
Wow. Really, really interesting perspective there, because we continue to see this gun violence take place. I know over the weekend, the U.S. saw 17 shooting deaths in 3 days. This is according to USA Today. They compiled the data here. We saw it in Philadelphia, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Michigan, and Omaha, Nebraska, and other towns and cities across the country. When you see these numbers and the violence that takes place, is there something that could be done that those who fully support the Second Amendment and Americans' rights to keep and bear arms, that there could be some sort of conversations or compromise that could be done to prevent this violence that we've seen?
I don't like the word compromise, because to me, compromise means, you give up a little of what you want and I won't get as much as I want, and we'll call that a deal. I think that there is room for collaboration. But again, I don't think that it can be focused on guns. We live in a country in which we have the right to keep and bear arms. We have 100 million gun owners, and we have some 400 million privately owned firearms. So I'll be blunt. I think any sort of attempt to reduce the supply of firearms and make us safer that way is doomed to fail. I think what we need to be doing is trying to reduce demand for firearms among those who criminally misuse them. And you look at, case after case. I've got a story coming up at Bearing Arms today about an individual in Chicago, Illinois, who 4 years ago was arrested, accused of shooting his stepson in the leg. He was given electronic monitoring and was released. And when he violated the terms of that electronic monitoring, a judge in Cook County simply ended the electronic monitoring so that the system didn't have to know that he wasn't breaking or that he wasn't following the rules. He wasn't following the law. When we have a criminal justice system that routinely pleads down violent felonies to misdemeanors, 97% of felony cases in this country are plea bargained down. When criminals know that they can get away with their crimes, when the homicide clearance rate is below 50% in major U.S. cities, when the clearance rate for non-fatal shootings is closer to 10%, well, there is no incentive for these individuals to not pull out a gun and shoot, because they know the odds are they're not going to get caught. So, yeah, there are absolutely things that we can be doing to reduce violent crime, but you're not going to do it by criminalizing law-abiding legal gun owners.
There's a lot of questions about how the debate over gun laws, gun reform, gun control might play into the midterm elections. We've heard President Biden speak out about this recently. He has repeated his claim that the Second Amendment is not absolute. He's also called to reinstate an assault weapons ban. I've heard gun owners take issue with the term assault weapons. and how it's been used compared to those who are calling to ban all assault-style weapons. Tell me about, how you view that call from the president and the fact, too, that he says it's not absolute.
Well, listen, I don't think any court will tell you that any right is absolute, but that isn't what Biden's actually getting at. What he's trying to say is that everything he's proposing is de facto constitutional, which is another question altogether. In fact, I think, already we have seen courts, the Ninth Circuit recently, rule that California's ban on sales of semi-automatic rifles to those under the age of 21, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds is unconstitutional. And yet that was the quote-unquote compromise that Joe Biden suggested if Congress can't ban the sale of modern sporting rifles outright. Look, we're talking about the most commonly sold rifle in America today. There are more AR-15s in the hands of legal gun owners than there are Ford F-150 pickup trucks on American roads. So the idea, again, that all of a sudden we're going to declare that this commonly owned firearm is off limits to Americans does fly in the face of the Constitution. And I know that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights might not matter to a lot of politicians in D.C., but I can tell you it matters to voters. It matters to gun owners out there. If we don't have the rule of law, if we don't have the protections of our Bill of Rights, if those words on that piece of parchment are now meaningless, then what the heck is this country all about? So this isn't a matter of if you don't support gun control, then you must be in favor of kids dying. That's how Democrats want to frame this question and frame this issue. I would argue that for most gun owners, we have thought long and hard about these issues, and we have come to the conclusion that going after the gun as opposed to trying to deal with the individual takes us further away from the real solutions that we can put in place to make this country a safer place.
Really interested to get your perspective on this. Kim Edwards, thanks so much. And as you point out, voters will have the final say. Thanks again.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.